Divorced Redditors. What is the craziest thing you or your former spouse did after divorce? Guys, before we start, we ask you to support our work by clicking the subscribe button and write in the comments which story you like the most. Have a great time. My ex-husband started dating his stepmom, who has been in his life since he was 11 years old. His stepmom and him are still together almost 5 years later. His stepmom confessed her love of my ex to his dad a few years ago, and they have since divorced. The dad is now dating a 21-year-old. I know all of this because I'm still close friends with my ex-husband's sister. It's so messed up, and I'm so grateful I left him when I did. Edit, I can't believe this exploded. Haha, here's the highlights. Won't say where it all unfolded because small towns, but they are all from New Jersey. I am not. The father and my ex-husband don't speak. Basically, everyone in that family, except stepmom obviously, hates my ex-husband and have cut him mostly out of their lives. It may have been a little grooming, but if you met my ex-husband, you'd see he's all around a plotting, manipulative, shitty person, so I think it was the other way around. He constantly talked during our marriage about how hot she was. Makes me feel nice to get that off my chest. Don't marry crazy. Story 2. While we were still married, she gets pregnant with the guy she was cheating on me with, who is also married to someone else. She has this idea that he's going to leave his wife, and they're going to get married. She got a lawyer and filed for divorce. I get a lawyer too. Only thing is that he works for his wife's father, who is setting him up to take over when daddy retires. He realized that getting a divorce means his cushy career is over, confesses everything to his wife, and begs for her forgiveness. His wife takes him back, and he cuts off my wife. Seeing that her dreams of living with her BF are over, she claims that I'm the father, which is impossible, because by that time, we hadn't had sex for more than a year before conception. This does not stop her from telling everyone who will listen that it's my kid. She has her lawyer drop the divorce proceedings. I tell my lawyer to start them with me as the plaintiff, and that I want to dispute paternity. I move out. She starts stalking me, shows up at my job and tries to get in. I work as a civilian in R&D at a military base. The MPs do not take any of her shit and wind up detaining her when she tries to run past the gate. She calls me at work to bail her out or something. I tell her that whatever she's done, it's not my problem, and hang up. I also was able to get a restraining order, which she violated repeatedly. She asked for everything, both cars, the entire house and contents, savings, my retirement account, etc., plus 7 years of spousal support. I offered no support and half of the assets. If she wanted to house, she'd have to buy me out and refinance in her name only. When the kid was born, she tried to put my name on the birth certificate anyway, but I'd already successfully disputed paternity, so that didn't go over well. She had to go after Loverboy, who was definitely less than happy to see her. In the end, we split the assets 50-50, sold the house, and she got no spousal support. I don't know if she was able to get money for the kid from Loverboy or not. She called me a few times after the divorce, wanting to get together and talk. The calls were in violation of the restraining order, but I never reported it. About 6 months after the divorce was final, I was offered a new job on the other side of the country. I took it and never told anyone outside of my family where I was going. Almost all of our friends believed her when she claimed the baby was mine and made me out to be the asshole, so I didn't really feel the need to tell them anything. Life is better now. Story 3. Kidnapped the kids during their weekend visit and moved to a small town in the next state over. It took me 2 years to get them back. Wow, this got huge. So everyone doesn't have to read all the comments. I did get them back. She eventually burned all her bridges in the town she moved to and went home to her parents' house. Since her parents were not pleased with her choices and were on my side during the whole deal, they called me to let me know where she was. I went and got them. This was over 20 years ago, and they have both grown up just fine. I've since remarried, and my second wife has been a wonderful mother to them. It took a lot of work to fix all the damage, but it's mostly okay. The biggest scars that lasted was that my son has a distrust of women with authority that he has worked really hard to get over. And my daughter was afraid to start her own family because she worries she would turn out just like her mom. She finally got over that and is expecting our first grand baby this fall. Story 4. She called my company. talked her way up the chain to the president of the company. Still don't know how she managed that, but she's smart, and told him I was suicidal and had threatened to do something drastic at work. Later, I learned that she thought this would be a roundabout way of getting my address, which I didn't share with her after I moved out, because she's batshit crazy. Story 5. Called me and pretended he had been hit by a car while we were talking. He even tried to voice the crowd that had gathered around his body. God-awful acting, but pretty funny listening to him try to mimic a woman's voice. Points for trying to be inclusive, I guess. I think he was trying to get me to relive my trauma of being on the phone with a friend who actually had been hit by a car while we were talking. Too bad he didn't realize that hearing the real thing is worlds different than hearing a dumbass try to act it out. Edit, I am so happy that I shared this. Y'all are making me laugh so much. Story 6. Stalked me for 5 years, would make fake social media profiles to try to follow me, which I would block endlessly, and would try to find where I worked so she could talk to me. This lady cheated on me with 7 different men, 2 months after we were married. I kicked her ass to the curb and made her sign the court papers. When we had our day in court, she cried in the judge's office, while I just wanted to get this shit done. After, my dad was with me, and he threw $50 at her and told her to change your fucking last name. Good guy, Pops. I haven't seen or heard from her in about 5 years. Thank goodness. Story 7. Final straw that led to the divorce. Got drunk and drove her car into the middle of the desert. Sent her friend a picture of the GPS. And said I didn't love her, so I wouldn't come and look for her. She wouldn't answer my calls, but kept calling her friend, saying I didn't care. I looked for 2 hours before going back home because I needed to work in the morning. She came home and started banging things around and came into our room and threw her phone at me saying I didn't love her, punched me in the face multiple times and went to jail. After I filed for divorce, she lost it. CPS wouldn't let her kids stay at the house because of the DV charge against her, so they stayed at her parents'. She purposely stayed at the house so that I couldn't see my kids. I refused to be alone with her after for fear that she would hurt herself and blame me, so I always went to the house with someone if I needed anything. She got tired of this and decided to just removed everything from the house while I was at work. I mean, everything that wasn't in my kids' bedrooms. She took out of the house. Curtains, ceiling fans, all of the furniture minus the dining table that I don't think she had room for. I thought, well, this sucks, but at least she's gone, so I changed the locks. She broke in and stole the locks the next day while I was at work, left nothing but the holes in the doors to swing open in the wind, took the window locks, cut the power cord to the garage door opener, took the blender that I borrowed from my mom, and popped the air mattress that I borrowed to sleep on. Then she flipped off the main breaker to the house, swore to the judge that someone else must have done it. Story 8. Kidnapped my 3 boys from my house when I went on my first post-divorce date. Our loved and trusted babysitter was with them. I left dinner ready, and kids bathed and already in their jammies. Left for the movie theater when I got a text from my babysitter that she was sorry for not doing the dishes after dinner. So I texted back, "That's okay, I can do dishes later, but you've got a couple hours as well. The movie hasn't started yet." She was at home as my ex-husband had shown up, lied and said he was supposed to have the boys that night, and that I had said it was okay. I was livid. I knew he was a bit crazy, but I had no idea he was capable of this. I stepped out of the theater, called him, and he said, "If you are going to be dating strangers and endangering the lives of my kids, I will take them." WTF. So I called the police. They did a report. We went to court, and he was found in contempt for violating our parenting plan. Story 9. Wife cheated on me. When I confronted her, she grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened me. I told her to go ahead. She put it in my chest, just deep enough to draw blood and cut down to my belly button. I hit her on top of her head. She fell to the ground. I left and, after signing papers, never saw her again. It's been 24 years now. Thank you for the awards, peeps. Had no idea my idiot marriage at 20 years old would be the topic with the most upvotes. Those 12 months are full of good stories. Looking back. Story 10. After years of telling me she wanted a child, that she wanted to be a mom, that her life's dream was to be a psalm, she got pregnant with the first guy she slept with while we were getting divorced and put the kid up for adoption even before it was born. This was a long-standing thing with her. She always wanted something. Car, house, dog, cat, marriage, etc. And the second she got it, she immediately hated it. Story 11. Laundry list. But my favorite was his sister sent a Facebook message to all of his contacts the day of our separation, including my family, before we announced anything. Her message stated everyone should immediately delete me, and if I said anything about why we separated, I was lying and not to listen. Basically, this created a lot of curious questions and a lot of laughs. Story 12. She got custody of our 3 kids, got 70% of my take-home pay for child support, requiring me to move into the barracks. I was in the USAF. Then she immediately moved out of state without telling me, despite the divorce decree requiring my consent, all but guaranteeing I would have no contact with my kids. That's not the crazy part. The crazy part is, just a few years later, she decided she didn't want to be a mother anymore, so she signed up with a carnival. I think she had the hots for one of the ride operators, and left the girls on their own, without telling me or the girls beforehand. She called my oldest daughter a few days after leaving to tell her to call me. They hadn't called me before, that because they had apparently grown accustomed to their mother disappearing for days at a time. Edit, some have asked what's happened since. This was decades ago. My children are all grown and married with their own children. They all learned after coming to live with me that I wasn't the monster their mother had brainwashed them to believe I was, and they all agreed to be adopted, as adults, by the light of my life, my wife, whom I would never have met if I hadn't been divorced. Only one of my children has any contact with her mother, mainly because my daughter still lives near where she grew up. That's where her husband and his family live. So that's where she'll stay. The best outcome of all of my children had the best example in the world of how not to be a mother, and consequently, all 5 of my grandchildren are having the best childhoods possible. Story 13. Prior to divorce, he established a pattern of asking me to sleep with someone else, usually MFF threesomes, usually friends of his, mine, ours, getting increasingly demanding, moody until I conceded, then reacting with extreme insecurity, jealousy, possessiveness, and need for reassurance afterwards until it happened again. It destroyed me as well as all of my in-person friendships, and I still don't understand why he needed to go through that psychodrama over and over, or why I didn't leave sooner. To clarify, there is nothing wrong with swinging, polyamory, or ethical non-monogamy, but he really just wanted an on-demand service, and couldn't take no for an answer, and could not stand the thought of me having feelings for anyone other than him, yet consistently thought I was waiting to cheat on him, or abandon him. Shortly before I filed for divorce, he broke into my apartment twice, once because he wasn't done talking, and then because the apartment complex director told him I couldn't legally kick him out of the apartment, sexually assaulted me while I was sleeping, called the cops and DCF because I blocked him on Messenger after close to 24 hours of non-stop texting from him, and chose to publicly throw a couple of punches and an energy drink at the still concussed TBI survivor he'd chosen as my most recent sex partner, as if any of this was that person's fault. Then he assaulted me in the backyard while refusing to leave and told the police I had attacked him. I filled a restraining order and divorce on the same day. 4 months after our divorce was finalized and he was granted full custody of our 3 kids for every school vacation, he decided to move halfway across the country to live with his mother. She's still taking care of him. His kids aren't particularly interested in talking to him and haven't seen him in over a year. I offered to pay for him to stay here over the summer so he could see them, but he said, nah, this is a fair reflection of his level of engagement with his kids prior to divorce too. I don't doubt that he loves them, but he rarely chooses to spend time with them because it's stressful. The cops, lawyers, Office of Child Support employees, and the judge have all responded the same way to his endless victim spiel, a tired sigh, a roll of the eyes. He continues to think his situation is everyone else's fault and totally unique. He follows me here and has quoted some of my posts in court. Hi Brian, Ita, thanks for the upvotes. Let me know if you've had a similar experience. He's texted to call me a lying whore, yet again. I've invited him to respond here. Or please quit stalking my social media, as I've asked. Or accept that we have different ideas of how things went. Story 14. My ex has done a shit ton of weird stuff. Thankfully, most of it not aimed at me. While we were separated and working on our divorce, he would come whine to me about relationship issues with my cousin, with whom he'd had an affair, and for whom he'd left me. Mind you, he'd moved in with not just her, but her common-law husband, and then was upset by how many other boyfriends she had. This is my cousin, who has more baby daddies than she has babies. Two of her offspring are simultaneously half-brothers and cousins. She's never been known for her monogamy, in other words, but he claimed to have been in love with her since they were children, and this was magically supposed to make her return his affections. Among the best witnessed from a distance bits of this nonsense were him getting jealous of her visiting her husband and running her off the road in his work van, and generally hanging around screwing her instead of taking jobs, to the extent that there were trainees making more money than he was after he'd been there more than a year, and he was eventually invited to resign or be fired. Then there was the time he was doing armed security, and angry at how taking our children on a first date to Austin, he expected to be allowed to stay over at this woman's apartment with his children and her children, and she was rightly horrified at the whole thing. Didn't go over well, had an argument with his girlfriend at the time, not my cousin, but the ex-wife of a different cousin, and drove to her house in his work vehicle to threaten her with a gun. This resulted in a firing, a restraining order, and loss of his right to carry a gun. Then there was the girlfriend, who insisted that if he really loved her, he'd move into the homeless shelter with her. So he fabricated being kicked out of his parents' house and spent the requisite month sleeping outside on the shelter's patio before intake. Then spent years, longer than the relationship, living in the shelter, only finally leaving to move in with a woman he'd met a month earlier, after ostentatiously asking our children's permission. As you can imagine, they felt they had no choice. Basically, it's been 13 years of reeling from one relationship to the next, all overlapping, and the kids pulled into them from the very first second. He's currently trying desperately to find another girlfriend to move in with, as the current one is kicking him out to move to Virginia with a new boyfriend of her own. This after some time of subjecting the kids to loud arguments over his XX addiction and their dead sex life, and naturally blaming me for the fact that his two oldest children both refused to talk to him at all. Two of my shortcomings as a wife, by the way, were being too classy, he quoted Confederate Railroad to me, and not providing the drama he felt requisite in a relationship. Story 15. I was sending $600 a month to support my daughter because she's the only thing I give a shit about. My ex texts me and tells me I need to be sending $1,200 a month because she's broke and can't pay her bills, and I should feel guilty about it. She left me for another guy while I was on deployment. I told her to go f*** herself. Call my lawyer. Story 16. We were living in a different state and she wanted to move back to her home state a year into our marriage. I really had nothing tying me down in that state, so I was down for moving if that's really what she wanted. It had been about 6 months into the move, and she cheats on me with a co-worker while I was working full-time and trying to finish up my bachelor's degree. She tells me that she didn't feel the same way about me, and that she needed to move out to do some thinking. It's driving me insane, trying to think about what could have gone wrong. I had a suspicion about that coworker, but I didn't have any proof. I checked our phone account online, and sure enough, they were talking every night after work while I was out working. I followed her one time, and sure enough, she was going to this guy's house. I confronted her about it, and she finally fessed up. So they continued dating after we finally divorce, and I was able to move on with my life. She ends up getting pregnant by this guy, and he disappears before their baby was even born. Karma definitely came back to bite her after the hell she put me through, all alone, in a new state with no friends, marks, family around. Story 17. This was from even I was a kid, and my parents were going through a divorce. My dad was a total sociopath, manipulative, physically and emotionally abusive, drug dealing, the whole 9 yards. Even my mom was finally able to get out. He still had visitation rights. His family kept on bugging my sister and me, still under 10 years old, to try to convince my mom to talk to him. She finally did try to talk to him when she came to pick us up at the police station from where it was agreed to meet when he had his time with us. They immediately got into an argument. He started throwing one of his temper tantrum, grabbed my mom in front on a cop from the LAPD trying to beat her. Then the cop grabbed him. He let go of my mom with a look of pure terror on his face. I think that was the day I realized he was sociopathic and didn't want anything else to do with him and his crazy-ass Bible-thumping family. Story 18. She would stalk my Reddit account and angrily text me if she didn't like my posts talking about her cheating on me. I came home from seeing my grandmother on her deathbed and found she had cheated. She also texted me, accusing me of sabotaging her attempts to get a job that requires a security clearance. Apparently, it was my fault, and not the fact she had already been denied a security clearance for mental instability. Story 19. During the whole process of divorcing, she insisted she wanted to be single and hadn't cheated on me. 5 days before we sold our house, she posted on Facebook that she was in a relationship with the guy I had asked about her cheating on me with. A year later, they were engaged. A year after engagement, they are married. Story 20. Not me, but my so. His ex-wife got married a few days after receiving the court's final decision on the annulment of marriage case. In our country, we don't have divorce. Well, okay, he has moved on already. Now her new husband plans to have his marriage to her annulled too. Edit. Hey, this blew up. Yes, we are in the Philippines. So f***ing hard to get an annulment here. I wish we could have divorce, where parties can end their marriage in amicable terms. Story 21. Not me, but my grandparents got divorced when my mom was about 17. In their legal battle, they worked out that they would each get 50-50 of the sale of specific shared assets. There was an old junky car and a fairly new RV. My grandpa sold the RV and the car for $1 each. He handed my grandma a buck in court. Story 22. Told everyone I was physically abusive. At the time and now, I am not intimidating in any way. It didn't come out until 2 years later when she needed to change something in our agreement, but couldn't unless I agreed. I made her tell her family that it was something she said when she was mad. Her mom apologized to me for saying things at the time. We are friends now. Have a son together, so it's best. But goddamn, I hated her guts for 5 years. Story 23. My ex stole a car and did 18 months in state prison. Based on what I was able to find online at the time, he approached a car dealership and showed interest in buying a vehicle. They allowed him to take it home for a 24-hour demo. He never returned it. They reported it stolen after they attempted multiple times to contact him to return it. They then contacted the state police, who put a bolo out. They found him driving the vehicle on the other side of the state where he thought he wouldn't be found. I found out when I got an unexpected phone call from the sheriff's office. I asked why they were calling me about this. They said I told them I would vouch for him as a character witness. I told the officer over the phone that my ex was a lying sack of shit and shouldn't be trusted. The officer laughed, thanked me for my time, and hung up. Story 24. During the divorce, but after separating my friends, ex tried to claim less assets than he really had, but she was dropping the kids off one day and found retirement fund statements sitting on the kitchen table. Despite claiming that they had been using his income for living expenses and hers was going into savings, somehow he managed to tuck away over $1 million into those two funds, under his name only. When she brought it up with the lawyer, he claimed that had just forgotten to put those on the list. Story 25. We divorced because I am gay. Afterwards, she remarried twice. Her second husband, Jack, died, and she remarried for the third time total, including me, to Randall, who was her worst choice of all. She finally ran him off. We decided to vacation together to New England, Montreal, and Quebec City to check some states off my list of states I have visited. All of them, by the way, except Hawaii. We did the trip like a survey course, in that we spent one night in many different towns and cities. For instance, we spent one night in Millinocket, Maine, and we climbed Mid-Katahdin the next day. Later, we took an 11-day cruise to Alaska together in 2005. We divorced in 1981. My ex died in 2009 of cancer. Of course, there were painful times and heartaches associated with our divorce after 18 years of marriage and the birth of 2 sons. But time can heal a lot of wounds, and former spouses can appreciate the part of the journey they took together, even when the have moved on to their next adventure. Story 26. The divorce was fairly amicable, but he met a woman on the internet and moved her into his apartment a month later. She hated seeing me because I had hurt him, but was also apparently still in love with him. Spoiler, I was emphatically not. She decided that getting my son removed from my custody would solve all her problems. So she called my work and made ridiculously false allegations to my administrator about my conduct with students, but sounded drunk, high, and wouldn't leave a name or contact information. Admin pulled her number from the caller ID, and X confirmed that it was that heifer's Oregon phone number. I had to get a temporary protective order for her, so X had her move out. Then she slashed my tires on Mother's Day. He confirmed that one after they broke up. Y'all, he kept dating her for another year. Even though he knew about everything, my therapist at the time told me that X probably found her behavior flattering. Story 27. Immediately got married. Maybe within 3 weeks was engaged in a very public way. In 3 months had adopted her child and came crawling back 3 years later because she was codependent and broke and a bad mother, shock wife, rejected. And they're still together. And I presume, miserable and broke. Now, edit. Since I'm salty and should love thy neighbor, let's unpack why I'm not. And I won't. Ha, my ex and I met in the army. I was cheated on the entirety of our relationship and their deployment. Unbeknownst to me, I refused to have a baby until my ex got therapy for severe PTSD and refused to buy a house in my name. We couldn't afford. I was effectively ghosted. Didn't know X was home from deployment until they pulled up to my house to pick up their stuff with future wife, right there in the new Benz X bought with deployment money while I struggled financially. Someone must have told X I could accuse them of infidelity, which is not permitted in the army, and I fielded hateful calls and texts from X and friends, and threats of the new wife beating me up for months. In the twist everyone who's ever been to MEPS could expect, the wife was a dependapatomus and skirted them right into bankruptcy and stole X's identity to take out credit cards. I was accused. The truth came out. Chaos. X was medically discharged, lost the house, is broke and bankrupt working at manual jobs supporting a grown woman who doesn't even have $10 to buy her baby juice. Every few years until I changed my number, I'd get a call or text from X's area code sniffling, inviting me on vacation, prodding because I'm doing well, and trying to gauge exactly how well, i.e. how much I'm making, I'm doing. I've spent thousands and half a decade in therapy, unpacking my hand in this. Rough upbringing, clung to the first person that looved me, moved too fast in traditional PFC fashion. My gut knew long before my heart and brain caught on that I was with a serial monogamist who could play my emotions like a Charlie Daniels plays the fiddle and would leave for the first shiny thing. I'm far removed from the emotion of hurt, salty, bitter though. The way I see it, God, the universe, karma, gave us both what we wanted. I wanted to heal and grow more as a woman before taking on a mortgage and becoming a mom. My ex wanted an opulent house price be damned and an exciting Insta family. It would have been nice to end in a way that wasn't a public Facebook post of their engagement, but hey, worse things have happened to better people than I. I occasionally see the $40K car they purchased in my city and chuckle to myself. I send a, I hope X is okay and remains far away, thought prayer, up to whoever listens to those. And I make sure to enjoy the beautiful life I've crafted for myself. So yeah, that guy in the comments and the DMs I've gotten, maybe if you got a lil puss every now and then, you wouldn't be so salty. Story 28. Continuously texted at all hours threatening suicide. I would rush over to do a welfare check and he'd open the door with a smile. Hey, since you're here, want to come in for a beer sex? Hard pass. Starting upping it, I rush over. He's nowhere to be found. I'm calling his parents, friends. Turns out he was just at a bar. Another time, he left a funeral playlist, a note, disappears off the face of the earth for almost a day. Reappears so drunk he almost ran into the house. After that, I just couldn't take it anymore. So the next time he started texting, I warned him that I would call the police if he was being serious, but I wasn't coming to check. He went 0-100 real quick about how he'd be dead before they got here, etc. So I called them. He ended up getting 51 and 50'd for the night. Very upset with me the next day, demanding a ride, and so on. I hung up, called his mom, said, not my mess anymore, here's the address. So then he just found new ways to torture me for a few years, but that one stands out the most. Story 29. My ex-husband messages, calls me every November. Our divorce was finalized November 2015. Last time I decided not to answer because I'm in a committed relationship. But every year, like clockwork, our divorce was messy to say the least. And after our final court hearing, we stood outside. When we divorced, she took my truck, Judge said, since she was giving me custody of our 3 kids. And I would need the family car seemed only right. She got my truck. 3 weeks after finalizing, she was going down a muddy road and ditched it, damaged some of the front suspension. She called the local guy, W, a tow truck, and he towed it back to where she was living. Since she needed a car, Her told her he trade her a Chevy Citation for the broke-down truck which she agreed to. He then called me and sold me the truck for the cheapy price he originally had on the Citation. I loved it. Had to spend a couple hundred on repairs, but she was freaked and pissed when she learned I got my truck back. Story 35. Killed or euthanize our dog, then lied about that he died of natural causes, given the dog was old and blind, but pleaded that she wanted a weekend with him, and then the next night sent me a fake text that he passed away during the night at like 3 a.m. because he coughed and then just stopped breathing. That wasn't true. I found out later, after finding and calling the vet she brought him to, that she badmouthed me about, and that he was suffering and needed to be put to sleep because he was in agony, and I was supposedly letting him suffer. She had him out to sleep like the day she took him home, like 3 hours afterwards. Never got to say goodbye, due to that. My coworker finally got divorced after 2 years of trying to work it out with her hubby. She had a disabled child that her ex refused to help with and pay child support. She decided to sell her engagement ring, diamond wedding band, and several pieces of jewelry her ex gave her over the year and that she was able to keep after the divorce. Every gem was fake. Her jeweler told her that gems has been recently swapped out for fakes. So the 2 years she was working it out with her ex, he was replacing all her jewelry with fakes. Not a divorcee, but when my parents were getting divorced, Mum walked out on my dad with zero warning to anybody in the family. They actually had a really amicable divorce, to the point that my dad even still teased my mum by sending her a card on their 22nd wedding anniversary a few weeks before the divorce. Absolute was official, just so he could claim he'd never forgotten their anniversary, sending her cards on her birthday, Valentine's Day, and even anniversary for the first several years after their divorce, just because he knew it made her new partner nervous that they might get back together. The two guys actually got along okay. My dad just liked teasing him occasionally, and had already moved on from the idea of ever reconciling. It was genuinely just a prank on the poor guy. My dad even kinda hoped they'd get married and fully close that chapter, but now her partner is in the advancing stages of dementia. That ship has pretty much sailed. Sigh. Where to begin? Ex was 10 years my senior and addicted to shopping and racking up installment debt. And is also bipolar. Bipolar 2, actually. We hit a real rocky spot. Ultimately called the police on me in my own home to try and get them to force me to leave. House, mortgage, in my name only, etc. I ultimately grabbed stuff and stayed with my folks for the duration of the divorce proceedings. Got my lawyer, etc. She ran to her mom, in her 60s, and played the innocent victim, had started a new job literally a week prior, and had the sheriff serve me with a protection order, saying I verbally, mentally, and physically abused her. I never laid a finger on her, and didn't even yell. I was a kid with a high-functioning alcoholic bully for a dad, so I was a go-along, get-along for most of my life. She got a lawyer. Actually, the most prominent divorce lawyer in the city. As I said, she cried to her mom to help her. We had a court date, and my attorney had originally worked with hers, but they stopped responding. At court, we both discovered that she showed up unrepresented. More on that in a bit. So my attorney mentioned to the judge she could handle the agreement, and the judge allowed if both parties were in agreement. My attorney had the two of us sit in a room and talk for a bit. She asked if we could patch things up. Keep in mind, this is now 6 months later with no communications, etc. I definitely didn't want that. I had gotten to the point that where she was so toxic that I no longer had cycles to try and keep her sane, and I was losing my own hold on sanity. I had to make a decision to save myself. So we settled everything with cash to get her TF out of my life. I get back to my house as she's moved out, and all my shit is just strewn everywhere, dumped out, etc. Cloths, books, magazines, papers, etc. While I was away for 6 months, she got a boy toy. Not really a boy. More like an overweight has been of a football player that smoked pot in the house each day and brought a cat in that used the couch. Arms as a scratching post. Mutual friends explained that while I was away, she was convinced I was trying to sneak into the basement and blow up the house using the gas lines, etc. Ultimately, her own son came to me a few years later and expressed that he appreciated everything I had done for him and even his mom, and said he felt I was more of a father to him than even his own biological father had been for the 10 years his mother and I were married. I have zero idea where she is today, but I still do hope she got the help she needed to no longer self-medicate and is now leading a stable life. So for her attorney, was the most prominent divorce attorney in town, had radio ads, etc., was a partner, along with his wife and others. Turns out my ex was able to retain him because her mother was sucking his Johnson on the side and blackmailed him to take my ex on. His wife and the other partners found out, literally bought him out of the firm, and his wife filed for divorce as well. Married a known con artist who had already stolen the funds from 401ks from 5 other ex-husbands. But she loves me and won't do that to me, he said. She said if I really love her, I should prove it by not asking either of us to sign a prenup, he said. She took his 401k 2.5 years later. Edit. Because so many are asking, here's how it went down. She convinced him to sign on to his state pension as beneficiary when they married. When they divorced, he realized she'd get half his retirement check, unless she agreed to have her name removed. State does not automatically remove names due to divorce. Both parties must agree. She offered to take her name off in exchange for the contents of his 401k. All of her other husbands were state employees, so she learned this early. I was still the beneficiary of his 401k at the time. We didn't know it. He'd simply failed to bring his financials to the divorce settlement and overlooked it. So we had a long discussion when it happened. I told him he didn't deserve to be treated that way, and he said he had no choice but to pay her off. I then signed the papers to remove me as the 401k beneficiary, because that was our original divorce agreement, that we would not touch each other's retirement or savings. The total amount she received was about 50k, if I recall. My ex worked in the private sector for only a short time. His pension had a death benefit payout of over 250k and $8k per month upon retirement. He is a high-level engineer for the state, so giving her the 401k was the less stupid choice. During the time they were married, she also spent most of his savings on high-end clothing, a new car, and vacations that he would never have wanted. He's into camping, not Vegas. X had to delay his retirement by about 5 years to recover financially. Story 40. We became best friends and worked together to raise our daughter. We share custody 50-50 and get together every other week to hang out together. Sometimes our significant others tag along. On Saturday, we're going to an amusement park, but usually it's just lunch or a board game night. We're way better parents apart. And life is good. Story 41. Bought an apartment in central London. Insanely expensive. Across the road from where I worked so she could spy on me. She also never wanted to live or work in London. I had no idea this had happened, and fortuitously, I happened to leave that position soon after we split, so it didn't really work. I only found out, however, when I was having drinks with a mate, and he happened to mention that my ex-apartment was just over there. We were by my old work. Story 42 called me the night before his wedding to his second wife and asked me if it was really over. He said, "This was our last chance to be together. Are you sure it's over?" The night before, he got remarried. Let that just marinate a little. I guess he didn't think me asking for the divorce. Paying for it and filing the paperwork wasn't the clue it was over. Story 43. We were still in divorce proceedings when my ex moved in a woman and her 2 kids. He'd only known them for 2 months. Then, her mom moved in shortly thereafter with her 2 dogs. The house was pure chaos, and my daughter slept in a closet when she went there because the girlfriend's kids got to take over the big bedroom. And surprise! Surprise! The relationship crashed and burned within a year. Good riddance. Story 44. Became roommates. We were always better friends than spouses. Our divorce was more a relief than an ending. It works for everyone, and our daughter loves having us both in the same house. Edit to answer questions below. As for how it came to be, we got amicably divorced in 2013. We lived separately after the divorce, with our daughter splitting time between two homes. We remained the type of friends that got together for cookouts and board game nights, etc. My ex got remarried and bought a house with her new husband. He turned out to be an abusive asshole, so they got divorced. She couldn't afford to keep the house on her own, so since I had a lease ending at the time, 2016, I offered to move in and pay rent. The arrangement worked out well, so last year, to get the other fool off the house, we refinanced the house with both of us as owners. I don't expect it to last forever, but at least as long as our daughter benefits. Every decision we made was with our daughter's best interest at heart. We remain supportive friends and awesome co-parents. We have frequent family dinners and movie nights and game nights, but we also have our own lives. Our friend group Venn diagram is mostly a circle. As for dating other partners, it helps that I am non-monogamous. I identify as a relational anarchist, so I only date other non-monogamous or polyamorous people. Those people tend to be perfectly unfazed by an ex-partner in the house. I wouldn't give someone the time of day if they had a big problem with it. So as far as my situation being unique, it's not as unique as you would think. As for future partners, being raw, I have no intention of getting married again or cohabitating another partner. I just don't do traditional relationships anymore. I know never say never, but probably never. I'm not going to preach about toxic monogamy, but it's a thing. I find it f***ed up that the default assumption is people are expected to hate their exes. That comes from people dragging out relationships that should have ended to the point that everyone resents each other. I'll be the first to admit my living situation is weird, but it's healthy. When I tell people, I get the occasional, I could never do that, but more often I get, that's weird but cool. Story 45. I started to use drugs. A couple years after divorce, I was off the deep end and running amok. I got arrested with a mobile pharmacy on me and found myself in jail. I bailed out, facing multiple felony charges. A week after bailing out, I went into a year-long rehab. I continued to fight my case after completing the year in rehab by volunteering for another 4 months. I got things reduced to misdemeanors and working on getting record expunged. It's been a wild 6 years. I am clean for over 4 years. Story 46. Left me in the middle of the night. Just packed all his shit and disappeared. Absolutely nothing led up to this. We didn't have the best relationship, but we had a pretty good few weeks and really good day that day. He shows back up hours later for something he forgot and asks if he could take my iPhone charger. Are you kidding me? Get the f*** out of here. I still have abandonment issues to this very day, and it has negatively impacted every relationship I've had since then, because I haven't been able to really let my guard completely down with anyone in fear of being suddenly left again, romantic and platonic. Plus, I now get extreme anxiety and start to freak out if I haven't heard from them for a while. The icing on the cake. While cleaning out the rest of his shit weeks later, I found a list of all the things he was planning to take with him. On that list was my f***ing turtle, my pet turtle. Not ours, mine. That's been with me since high school. Psycho. You, Christian. Story 47. She got hooked on morphine and alcohol. She got a new boyfriend that stalked my kids and I for over a year during a custody battle. They tried to get my daughter thrown into a mental facility by calling the cops on us constantly. I still don't know how they thought that'd work. He then started emailing me over 100 times per day with all sorts of threats and very personal details of my kids and I lives that he got from my ex. He would constantly call my kids and I on our cell phones. My ex gave him the number, tried to call my work to get me fired, which was never going to work, but it was super embarrassing. They friended my friends and family, or called them to make false claims of child abuse. They called my kids' schools, to the point where I had to have several meetings with the principal and administrators, constantly tried to get into our accounts, which would lock us out. She slashed my tires, broke windows in my house, Can't prove those claims, but she hinted that she did it, etc. He did all of this from another state while coordinating with my ex-wife in this state. I had to get 4 restraining orders against him because they kept expiring and he wouldn't show up to court before I finally got a final one. During that hearing, the magistrate finally ordered a bench warrant for stalking against him, but they won't file for extradition. I then sued her for custody after I already had removed the kids from her house. $25,000 later from my side, and several thousand from her side. I won full legal and physical custody. She has limited visitation. The stalker guy then broke up with her, but not before I had to get an alarm and cameras set up around my house. She got a new boyfriend, literally the next week. All they do is drink and constantly do opiates. She moved him into her house immediately and never saw the kids again, which is definitely for the best. She was a freaking nightmare. It's been a year since then. My daughter just graduated, and she showed up to that. She was sipping airplane bottles of alcohol the whole time, and was wasted by the commencement speech. I have no idea why we had a huge custody battle if she was just going to dip. Whatever. We're happy and the kids are thriving. My daughter had a 4.0 average this year, and my son had a 4.5. I'm super proud of them both. My daughter is now off to college. Story 48. Not me. But my wife's first husband is on wife number 5. He and my wife were married for 24 years, together for 28. He was married to his second wife for under a year. His third wife died under circumstances so mysterious that the sheriff still carries her death as an open, unsolved homicide, but they could never prove he did it. The fourth wife divorced him. She was the sister of his third wife, BTW, because by that time, the degenerate alcoholism that caused my wife to divorce him had him basically getting drunk every single day and taking out his impotent rage on her physically. At one point, he pulled a hatchet on a neighbor over some stupid imagined slight, and the neighbor not only took the hatchet away from him, but punched out a few teeth as well. He is now shopping online. Russia, where wives number 3 and number 4 came from, for wife number 5. His living conditions would make people from the poorest areas of Alabama and Louisiana look down on him. He likes to call his sister at all hours of the day and night and scream at her how she ruined his life, with absolutely no reason. His 2 children, my stepkids, have basically cut him out of their lives. I have 3 granddaughters, and he has spent a total of about 10 hours in their presence. The oldest is 12, then 10, then just 9. So, to answer up, murdered his third wife and got away with it. Story 49. TLDR. My cheating ex-husband's bit on the side got me deported 3 months before I achieved full residency and got my citizenship. I had a 3-year relationship whilst working in a different country. Eventually, as my visa was running out, my partner and I got married in order to stay together in his country and keep our relationship going. We had a home together. In love, I thought. Planning children. I had a fantastic job. Life seemed pretty cozy. I achieved short-term residency and was 6 months away from getting my permanent citizenship. That's when I discovered that my then-husband had been cheating with someone else for close to half a year. We'll call her EB for extreme. Separated from my husband immediately, and he moved his cheating ass straight in with EB. Good riddance. However, X and I agreed to keep the charade of our marriage going until I could get my citizenship in the bag. Then we planned to file for divorce. The EB got knocked up, and she just hated the fact my ex was still married to me. So with only 3 months to go until I got my citizenship, EB reported me and my ex-husband's situation to the authorities. Because of this, we were investigated, and I had my citizenship application and residency revoked, lost my work visa, lost my dream job, and I got deported from my country of choice. Banned from that country for 5 years for fraudulent visa applications too. She literally bitch-slapped me out of the damn country. Edit to add. The EB reported 4 separate times in order to get immigration to come investigate. She could Karen with the best of them. Story 50. 2 years after our divorce was final, we still had to be in regular contact because of our 5-year-old son. He asked me if I'd give him a 5 a.m. wake-up call the next day because he had an early flight for a business trip. I said, of course I wouldn't do that. We aren't married anymore. He should buy a damn alarm clock. He overslept, missed his flight, thought he was going to get fired, and called me to berate me for not calling to wake him up. He was a real delight. Story 51.